What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Miss Marple and the hidden room at Emberstone Manor, hit me up. What made you smile today? And where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready. Because nothing in Whispers in the Fog is ever what it seems. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Locked Door at Emberstone. The rain poured relentlessly against the slate roof of Emberstone Manor, creating a soft yet unnerving rhythm that echoed through the dimly lit hallways. Thick clouds clung to the night sky, blocking the moon, while gusts of wind rattled the leaded windows with an eerie whistle. Inside the drawing room, the flames flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows as if they were vying to escape the chill of a long-abandoned home. Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming resident of the nearby village of St. Mary Mead, sat by the fire, her sharp eyes reflecting both the flames and a shrewd intelligence that belied her guise of gentility. Her ears perked at the distant sound of muffled voices drifting through the corridor. She had been invited to Emberstone at the behest of her childhood friend, Lady Cecily, who had taken up residence in the manor after her husband was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The villagers had spoken of the tragic accident, but whispers of foul play danced around the air like the smoke curling from the fireplace. It was this very intrigue that had drawn Marple to Emberstone on this rainy evening, a night heavy with secrets. As she leaned forward, the crackle of the fire was pierced by a sharp sound, the thud of something heavy falling against wood. Miss Marple glanced at the half-open door, her heart quickening. This was not the first time she had encountered curiously inelegant noises here. In the past week, there had already been 2 incidents of unexplained disturbances. But this felt different, fraught with significance. "Did you hear that?" she asked, turning towards Lady Cecily, who was draped across a lavish chaise, her pale face showing signs of distress. Cecily nodded, eyes wide. "It's coming from the study. I locked it earlier, just after our guests left." "Locked?" Marple stood, her mind whirring with thoughts akin to spells cast over delicate porcelain. "Perhaps we should investigate." With cautious steps, Miss Marple made her way to the study door. It was heavy, the kind that had seen centuries of secrets, straining against the lock as she turned the knob. The wood felt cold under her palm, as if it had absorbed sorrow over the years. When she pushed the door open, it creaked ominously, revealing a darkened room cluttered with old books and tall cabinets. Her breath caught in her throat as she stumbled upon the scene before her. A body, one that had been lodged against the door, tumbled inwards, revealing the lifeless form of Sir Reginald Firth, Lady Cecily's husband. Thick red blood oozed from a wound at his temple, the edges sticky and grotesque. The room was stifled in a damp darkness, only poor illumination spilling through the window, and the words accident and misfortune felt foolish curling on Miss Marple's tongue. Cecily gasped and clutched her pearls, her eyes wide with horror. "Reginald, oh God, what have I done?" Marple's mind raced as she glanced at the man's hand, opened unnaturally upon an ink bottle that had tipped onto the floor, the black liquid merging with the spreading pool of blood. Marple, kneeling close, observed a small, crumpled note lying nearby, hastily written as if in a tremor of urgency. "Cecily," she said, her voice steady against the rising tide of panic. "What do you know about this note?" I've never seen that before," Cecily stammered, fumbling with her own neckpiece. I can only think that it's related to his business dealings. Business dealings? What do you mean? Marple asked, her analytical eye fixating on her friend's reaction, the slight tremble in her hands and the ghost of avoidance in her eyes. Reginald was involved in questionable investments. Sometimes they upset people. Her confession lingered in the air as the shadows enveloped them. As the flash of lightning illuminated the chamber, its brilliance unveiled a twist, a discarded, half-empty envelope on the desk that bore the emblem of Mortimer and Sons, a notorious firm linked to shady trades. Miss Marple picked it up delicately, her mind crafting connections between Cecily's veiled words and Reginald's untimely end. "Cecily, you must be forthright with me, for there are more questions than answers here," Miss Marple urged, her voice echoing the urgency that was creeping into her mind like the summer rain. With an emotional tremor, Lady Cecily blurted, "Reginald had enemies, people who could have locked this door against him. He claimed he was going to expose them." Marple looked up, sharply, the pieces of the puzzle swirling in her thoughts. The locked door suggests someone wanted him contained, whether to confront or to silence. But why were they here, and who arrived after you locked it? Cecily's expression turned ghostly. "He said he would meet someone tonight." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep within the manor, shattering the stillness, igniting fear in both women's hearts. Marple turned abruptly, measuring the tension around them. "I suggest we find who or what remains at Emberstone first before we question the why. We need to secure this place." Both women turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a resounding echo rattling their very core. It was locked from the outside. In that moment, they understood. The danger was not only lurking within the shadows, but outside the door that commanded their fate. The clock on the mantel ticked menacingly, marking their breaths as Miss Marple began to formulate a plan, while a singular thought nagged at her mind: who could have locked it, and why wasn't one of them included in the dangerous game? As they stood frozen in uncertainty, the unanswered questions loomed, leaving Miss Marple on the precipice of discovery, an unraveling mystery waiting just beyond the locked door itself. The hunt for truths began where the echoes of the past had met the darkness of deceit, and the game had only just begun. Chapter 2. The letter that arrived too late. The rain fell in heavy sheets, each drop transforming the quaint village of St. Mary Mead into a blurred canvas of grey and shadow. The flickering light of a solitary street lamp illuminated the slick cobblestones, casting a web of trembling reflections that danced nervously in the gathering dusk. Even for a village where secrets nestled in the crevices of life, this night felt different, more ominous. As Miss Marple peered through the lace curtains of her sitting-room window, her heart raced. The usually silent streets echoed with a cacophony of distant thunder, as if even the sky was cautioning against the events unfolding that night. Just moments earlier, a frantic knock at her door had interrupted her evening tea, only to reveal young Gregory Finch, the postman, drenched and breathless. "Miss Marple," he had exclaimed, thrusting a sodden envelope into her hands. "This letter, I shouldn't have delivered it, but it arrived just as I was about to close up." Now, standing before her hearth, she carefully inspected the envelope. It was addressed in a hurried scrawl that was barely legible, the ink smudged, as if the writer had sketched his feelings in haste. The postmark read the day before, but it was the name that sent a chill spiraling down her spine. Adrian Pritchard. Adrian had been a vibrant young woman at the heart of the village, her laughter echoing through the halls of the manor where she lived until unthinkable tragedy had struck, leaving the Pritchard estate shrouded in sorrow and suspicion. Curiosity gnawed at Miss Marple. With a delicate hand, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It started frantically. "I can't tell anyone, but if you're reading this, it means I am no longer—" The words blurred in her mind as the weight of their implications mounted. She pressed on, her pulse quickening as she pieced together the desperate plea for help that emerged from the ink. "You must get to the willow tree at midnight. The truth lies buried beneath." The room felt colder, the shadows deepening, as she finished reading. "Midnight," she whispered thoughtfully, glancing at the grandfather clock, its hand creeping towards 10. It would not do to ignore Adrian's final words, regardless if they had come too late. Even with the grim spectre of tragedy looming over the Pritchard estate, she knew she could not turn away from the call for justice that continued to echo, a haunting refrain that pulsed through her heart. The rain intensified, hammering down against the window, muffling the sounds of the world outside. Miss Marple shook off her unease, preparing her small oil lamp, its warm glow casting flickering shadows against the walls. She chose her wellies, kissed her cat, and set out through the downpour, the familiar path to the Pritchard Manor guiding her steps. The path was overgrown and wild, slick with mud and unkempt foliage, but Miss Marple walked with purpose. She passed the crest of the hill, the manor coming into view as a looming silhouette against the tumultuous sky. The ivy-clad walls shivered in the wind, and for a moment she paused, casting her mind to the Pritchards, wealthy, proud, and yet irrevocably tainted by dark secrets. Among them lingered Charles Pritchard, Adrian's older brother, a man of little charm and considerable temper. His late wife, Margaret, had succumbed under suspicious circumstances shortly after Adrian's untimely demise. There were whispers of family rivalries, hidden inheritances, jealousy over stolen affections that had marred the family's image. And yet, someone had felt compelled to deliver this letter to her, a letter that might unearth buried truths. She arrived at the willow tree, its twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers against the icy wind. The sounds of nature fell silent around her, and just as she began to dig her fingers into the earth, the tenor of muffled voices echoed from the shadows behind her. She froze, crouched low. Miss Marple strained to make sense of the murmurs filtering through the storm. "I won't be implicated, not again," a deeply familiar voice hissed. Charles Pritchard himself. If that wretched girl had remained silent. "Calm down, Charles," a soft, lilting voice coaxed. "We must act fast. This is our only chance." Miss Marple's heart pounded as she turned to her surroundings. The voices were drawing nearer. The rain roared like an audience on the brink of revelation. She slipped behind the roots of the tree, the words swirling in her mind. Someone wanted to silence Adrian's memory, but the urgency in their tones suggested their plan was to expunge something much larger than a mere scandal. Suddenly, a sharp cry fractured the storm. A figure stumbled into the moonlight, drenched and wide-eyed, holding something glistening in the dim light of the lantern she had forgotten. "Miss Marple!" It quivered. It was Cynthia, the housemaid, her pallor ghostly as if she had seen a spectre. "You must come quickly. There's been an accident by the pond." Before she could ponder what that meant, the sounds of desperate scuffling filtered back across the path. The confrontation had escalated. A good detective knew when to retreat for the sake of gathering evidence, and when to advance without hesitation. Swallowing her instinct to charge forward, Miss Marple lighted her lamp and called to Cynthia. "Lead the way, quickly and carefully now." The urgency in Cynthia's voice, as they sprinted through the downpour, was almost palpable, but in the recesses of Miss Marple's mind swirled the unanswered questions. What lay beneath the willow tree? Who was intent on guarding Adrian's secrets? As they neared the pond, where the moonlight shimmered hauntingly, she understood they were on the cusp of unveiling something vast and terrible, a truth destined to change the very fabric of their quiet village. At the edge of the water, splashes chattered like hushed whispers, and the darkness beckoned. Hope hung heavy on the air, but with it drifted a remote sense of dread. As she reached the pond's bank, a glint caught her eye, a piece of velvet fabric tangled around a stone. It was deep, dark blue, the same shade as Adrian's favorite evening gown, the last one she had been wearing on that ill-fated night. Miss Marple's heart raced to the rhythm of her sharp deduction. Whatever awaited her next, in the heart of St. Mary Mead, a confrontation loomed on the horizon, a confrontation that might unearth more than secrets buried in the soil. Whatever lay beyond the pond, she felt, was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The heir who vanished. The rain hammered against the slate roof of Gildersleeve Manor like a relentless chorus, drumming out an ominous tone that made the dimly lit hallways seem even darker. Miss Marple peered through the dusty stained glass of the parlor window, her eyes narrowing as the night deepened and solitary raindrops raced each other down the glass. She had seen many peculiar events in her time, but there was something particularly unsettling about the disappearance of Benjamin Enderby. The only heir to the ancient estate had vanished without a trace, as though he had melted into the storm. Only hours earlier, Miss Marple had been sipping her beloved chamomile tea in the quaint town of St. Mary Mead, the commotion surrounding Benjamin a mere whisper on the wind. Yet tonight, those whispers had grown into frantic shouts, drawing her to Gildersleeve and its wealth of secrets. She let the teacup rest gently in her lap. Her thoughts were absorbed by the incongruity of the young man's disappearance just 2 days after his father's sudden death. "Miss Marple," a soft voice pulled her from her reverie, and she turned to see Prudence, the elderly housekeeper, standing uneasily at the door. "There's been a development." Prudence's voice trembled as she beckoned Miss Marple to follow her. The darkness enveloped them as they descended the creaky staircase into the manor's cellar. The scent of damp stone and aged wood filled the air, and the flickering candlelight revealed a clutter of forgotten artifacts, broken furniture, dusty trunks, and the remnants of long-gone lives. At the center of this sepulchre lay an overturned wooden chest, its lid barely ajar. "Is this—" Miss Marple began, her heart racing as Prudence nodded silently, blinking back tears. Inside the chest, nestled beneath crumpled linen, was an ornate clock, its face marred by the passage of time, marked with symbols that Miss Marple recognized all too well from her rare visits to antiquities shops. Beneath the clock, an envelope lay flat, a letter, the script elegantly inscribed but desperately shaky. As Prudence gingerly withdrew the letter, Miss Marple's eyes darted around the cellar, searching for the hidden corners of the manor that might offer clues. "Dear Benjamin," Prudence read aloud, "I cannot stay here any longer. You know what they want from you." The letter abruptly cut off, leaving only speculation hanging in the air. Who could they be? Miss Marple mused, her mind racing. And why would Benjamin wish to flee under such circumstances? Those who haven't mourned properly will reap what they sow, Prudence murmured. Her voice quivered, carrying the toll of apprehension. That's what Mrs. Enderby always said. Mrs. Enderby, the widow? Miss Marple recalled the elegant yet terse demeanour of Clara Enderby, Benjamin's mother, who had not graced the manor with her presence since her husband's passing. Her absence might be as telling as Benjamin's. Quite the oddity, isn't it? Just then, the cellar door creaked open, and a figure emerged, a tall man in a long overcoat, coating draping over him like a shroud. Walter Hargrove, Benjamin's closest friend, stood wide-eyed in the flickering light. His usually confident posture was quaking now, fear and agitation replacing his usual bravado. He staggered forward, breathless. "Miss Marple, Prudence, we have to search the grounds. I just saw something." "What have you seen?" Miss Marple pressed, her curiosity piqued. "I saw Clara," he stuttered, his voice rattled. "She was in the woods behind the manor, but when I approached her, she vanished." "That's deeply troubling," Miss Marple remarked, "and most revealing. Clara, just days after her husband's death, is out in the storm. Perhaps she, too, feels the weight of the past." "She was looking for something," Walter insisted, his eyes darting nervously from Prudence to Miss Marple. "I swear it. One moment she was there, her hair drenched, calling out Benjamin's name, and the next—" He stopped, visibly shaken. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Did she cry out anything else? Anything that could provide a clue?" "I think she mentioned Sir Alistair," Walter stammered, his brow furrowing in dread. "But why would she invoke his name now? He was Benjamin's father, and—" "She was always very proud of that family name," Prudence interrupted, shaking her head. "But behind closed doors, I never saw a bond between them. Clara spent years locked away from the manor. Still, whatever bond existed must have unravelled tragically," Miss Marple interjected, her mind churning even faster. "But we mustn't waste time. If Clara is out there searching, that could mean Benjamin is in grave danger." As they prepared to ascend back through the cellar door, Miss Marple's heart raced with an urgency that swirled through the surrounding darkness. Suddenly, a sharp thud echoed from the depths of the cellar, causing them all to freeze in place, dread pooling in Miss Marple's chest. A low whisper followed, barely discernible, yet haunting. "Help me." The voice was faint, barely breaking the silence, a tortured plea intermingled with the sound of rain against the roof above. Miss Marple exchanged alarmed glances with Prudence and Walter, the urgency palpable. What was that?" Prudence gasped. "Only one way to find out," Miss Marple replied, her resolve hardening. "Come, our search may have taken a more sinister turn than we anticipated." The three of them turned back toward the darkness of the cellar, driven by the mysterious call that echoed through the silence, desperate to uncover whether it was the voice of the heir who vanished, or something altogether more menacing, lurking in the shadows. Chapter 4. The Will That Was Never Signed. The rain fell in sheets that night, a relentless downpour drumming against the leaded glass windows of St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple peered through her lace curtains, the warm glow of her sitting room flickering in the light of a solitary oil lamp. The storm painted the village in a wash of greys and blacks. Even the usual comforting sounds of the night seemed muffled beneath the tumult. She had nearly settled into her knitting when a knock came, sharp and insistent, at her door. It startled her, and her heart quickened. Visitors at this hour were seldom good news. "Miss Marple." It was Mrs. Dinkley, breathless and soaked to the skin, her face pale against the darkened background of the storm. "I'm sorry to intrude, but it's about Mr. Rotherham. You know, the one who... He's been found dead." Miss Marple raised her eyebrows. Her interest piqued. Samuel Rotherham had been a local benefactor and a curious man with a reclusive nature. "Dead, you say? What happened?" "They've found him at the manor, with a letter near him. The police are calling it a suicide, but I'm not so sure. The letter, it's a will, but it isn't signed." The words rushed out, a torrent of anxiety. Miss Marple felt a chill slide down her spine. "Not signed? How peculiar. You'd better lead the way, Mrs. Dinkley." The two women made their way toward Rotherham Manor, the road slick with rain and dark shadows enveloping them. Thoughts churned in Miss Marple's mind. A will not signed was not a will at all, and the implications were significant. As they reached the manor, she noticed the lights glowing in the drawing room like a beacon. It seemed Rotherham's death had drawn a small crowd of official faces and curious neighbours. "Miss Marple, thank goodness you've come." Officer Grimsby, a young man with a furrowed brow, emerged from the throng, his voice strained with worry. "We're in something of a muddle. The letter, it doesn't seem to match Mr. Rotherham's usual flirty style." With a knowing nod, Miss Marple made her way through the gathering crowd. The smell of damp fabric and the whisper of hushed voices hung heavy in the air, weaving a tapestry of unease. She eventually stood before the desk in the drawing room, where Rotherham lay, curled against the armchair as if he sought rest. The letter lay open beside him, ink still damp, its edges slightly crumpled. "Tell me about it," she requested, motioning for Officer Grimsby to sit beside her. "It was found on his lap," Grimsby said, glancing uneasily about. "He was meant to have signed a revised will this morning. Quite coincidentally, I would say, given the rumours about his estate." "Rumours?" Miss Marple asked, her mind sharpening. The villagers held many peculiarities, none more so than their gossip. As Grimsby hesitated, she pressed on. "Do you suspect someone has reason to—" "Several. There's Miss Oliphant, a cousin who's always been after Rotherham's finances, and then there's Mr. Hargrove, the estate manager. She thought he was involved in some shady dealings," Grimsby explained, lowering his voice. "They both stood to gain considerably had he removed the legacies for his foundation." Miss Marple examined the letter again. The handwriting was slightly shaky and bold, quite unlike the careful and sweeping script she had seen before from Mr. Rotherham. In the dim light, she gathered a sharpness to the text, indicating a rush of thought rather than reason. "It appears, officer, that our friend did not wish to upset anyone whilst traversing this path to his grave, yet what we have is non-committal at best." At this, she turned to face Mrs. Dinkley, who was listening closely. "You knew him well. Did he have any enemies?" "Oh, I wouldn't say enemies, but Mr. Rotherham had a way of inciting interest. His charity work attracted both admirers and those who fancied themselves entitled. Perhaps jealousy features somewhere in this dreadful equation." Mrs. Dinkley offered, her hands nervously wringing her skirt. "Quite so," Miss Marple murmured, brain racing with connections. But just as she was about to delve deeper, the door swung open, and in strode Miss Oliphant herself, dripping wet and anxious. A cascade of revulsion swept through the crowd as she surveyed the scene. "What has happened here? Samuel was supposed to meet with me. I wanted to discuss his plans," she squeaked, as if the words had burst forth against her will. "Your plans, Miss Oliphant? Many would argue his demise benefited you," Miss Marple said calmly, studying the woman's involuntary twitch at the words. "What indeed motivated your eagerness?" I only wanted to secure his legacy for our family, but I had nothing to do with his death." The panic in her eyes was palpable as she shook her head forcefully, but Miss Marple noted a strange glimmer of relief that flickered there. At that moment, Grimsby murmured something abruptly at the letter, causing Miss Marple to lean closer. "Miss Oliphant, it seems you wish for the estate less than you'd have us believe. There is a hint of urgency here. Why else would the will not be signed?" Miss Oliphant's eye darted to the letter, then back to Miss Marple. "I don't know. I wasn't the last to see him. I swear it." "Interesting," Miss Marple said, with a thoughtful nod, preparing to press further when the rain outside lessened, replaced by a strange sound that pierced the heavy atmosphere. An abrupt knock at the door. Before anyone could react, it swung open yet again, revealing the estate manager, Mr. Hargrove, pale-faced and visibly shaken, his hands trembling at his sides. "I have something to say," he exhaled, drawing the room's full attention, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. Miss Marple's senses snapped to attention. This was not just any piece of information, but perhaps vital to unraveling the knot that held so many together. What had he uncovered? Would it tie them to the shadowy whispers that began swirling in the furthest corners of her mind? As she focused on Hargrove, intent on reading the truth behind his haunted gaze, another flash of brilliance struck. Had Mr. Rotherham left a message warning of dangers that ran beyond his estate? What secrets had he toyed with, hidden away from prying eyes? Questions bubbled like the frantic rain outside, and just as Miss Marple leaned in to demand clarity, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the room into darkness. And in that blackened silence, every conspiratorial breath hung in the air, echoing with the promise of a truth waiting to be unearthed. A truth that lay entangled within the unclaimed lines of a will that was never signed. Chapter 5. A whisper in the drawing room. The rain was a persistent drizzle, tapping angrily against the large bay windows of Barrowfield Manor, creating a chorus that complemented the frustrated murmurs of the guests gathered inside. Miss Marple, seated comfortably in a worn armchair, observed with quiet intensity. She was a backdrop among the elegant yet increasingly uneasy party, their chatter strained with unanswered questions and fear. The recent death of Lord Ravensdale had cast a pall over the evening, and the exquisite drawing room, usually filled with laughter, felt haunted. It was then that Miss Marple's gaze was drawn to a shadowy corner of the room, where a shiver of movement caught her attention. A figure in a dark dress, Evelyn Renshaw, stood near the fireplace, her hands nervously wringing a silken handkerchief. Miss Marple had seen Lord Ravensdale's modernist sculpture displayed prominently there just days earlier. Now it remained conspicuously absent, splatters of red paint littering the pristine marble base, a ghastly remnants of something much darker that had occurred. "Miss Renshaw, dear, is something troubling you?" Miss Marple asked gently, her voice like the calming glow of an ember. The young woman jumped slightly, her troubled eyes darting to meet those of the observant spinster. "It's nothing really," she stammered, "just a headache." The tremor in her voice belied her words. Miss Marple leaned forward, knitting her fingers as her keen mind whirred with possibility. "Headaches do have a way of magnifying unease, don't they? I've often found that getting to the root of the matter helps alleviate them." At this, Miss Renshaw's composure cracked slightly, the ghost of a blush warming her pale cheeks. Across the room, Colonel Simpson raised an eyebrow. "That's quite the observation, Miss Marple. I suspect many of us have headaches of differing varieties this evening." He gestured towards the group of partygoers fidgeting uneasily. Lord Ravensdale's passing creates quite a stir. Indeed, Miss Marple replied, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed the men and women around her, each wearing a mask of facade that belied their true emotions. And yet, something tells me that much more lies beneath the surface than mere grief. At that moment, the drawing-room door creaked open, and Geraldine Ravensdale, the late Lord's niece, stepped in, drenched from the rain and visibly shaken. She pulled her damp hair back and looked at the assembled guests with despair etched across her face. "I beg your pardon for my sudden entrance," she began, her voice taut, "but I heard voices outside the library, a whispered conversation. Goodness, what on earth could be happening out there?" interjected Lady Margaret, her eyes practically bulging. "Calm down, Geraldine," Colonel Simpson said, dismissively waving a hand. "It's probably just the wind." The sudden fear in Geraldine's eyes belied the Colonel's bravado. "No, it was not just the wind. I distinctly heard someone discussing murder." A sharp intake of breath floated around the room. "Exactly what did you overhear?" Miss Marple pressed, a glimmer of curiosity peppering her tone. "It was only a few words, but Geraldine took a shuddering breath. "They said something like, 'He'll pay, and he will suffer.'" Miss Marple's pulse quickened as each member of the party absorbed this revelation, their faces shifting from shock to suspicion. "What did you see, dear? Can you remember anything else? A figure, perhaps?" "I couldn't see anyone," Geraldine whispered. "It was too dark, just shadows." "What shadows?" The Colonel glanced towards the large library door, tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. But before Geraldine could respond, there came a loud crash from the far side of the mansion, a sound that echoed ominously through the narrow corridors. The group froze, hearts pounding with fear, as the echoes of the crash filled the air with a sinister promise. Miss Marple stood abruptly. "Everyone, remain here," she commanded. "I believe our shadows are stirring, and it is time we shed a little light." The rain continued to patter against the window, unsuspecting of the tension brewing within the manor. Miss Marple moved to the library door, her heart racing with curiosity rather than trepidation. This was her element, the unraveling threads of human behavior. As she reached for the handle, she glanced back, catching Evelyn Renshaw's gaze. The young woman was watching her, eyes wide yet narrowed, as if Miss Marple could solve every mystery with just a glance. The library was dark, save for a flickering candle that cast long shadows on the ancient wooden shelves. The ornate furniture loomed larger in the dim light, each piece steeped in stories of its own. A book had fallen from one of the shelves, pages torn and wilted like the crushed hopes of its owners. But what caught Miss Marple's eye was not the fallen tome. It was the glint of something metallic lying precariously beside it, a silver letter opener, stained with a rust-like pattern that sent a chill spiraling down her spine. Picking it up, she felt the weight of its presence, and a single thought solidified in her mind. This was no ordinary piece of cutlery. Miss Renshaw's headache might be more connected to more than just familial conflicts, she murmured softly, tucking the letter opener into her sleeve. The whispers of motives danced through her thoughts. Evelyn's anxious hands, Geraldine's wild eyes, the Colonel's deflection. Just as she turned to leave, an abrupt bang resounded from the front door, and her heart raced anew. The final echo reverberated in the silence of the house. With the candle flickering low, Miss Marple stood poised at the precipice of understanding, a sudden realization washing over her. The fabric of fear was tightening. A storm was rising beyond the veil of the stormy night. As Miss Marple made her way back towards the drawing room, the dread settled in on her shoulders like dense fog, and she felt the whisper of danger. Something was yet unsaid, and soon perhaps it would not just be whispers in the drawing room. It might just be their undoing. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Garden. In the murky gloom of an unusually rainy evening, a chilling shriek shattered the tranquil ambience of St. Mary Mead, echoing through the damp air like a warning. Miss Marple, comfortably ensconced in her sitting room, paused mid-stitch, her needle hanging motionless above a half-finished tapestry of draping roses. Even the rain pressing against her window seemed to quieten in anticipation. Then she heard it again, a cry of desperation that pierced the stillness. "Goodness gracious," she muttered, setting her sewing aside and rising with surprising speed for a woman of her years. She hurried to the window, peering out into the darkened garden, a wild tangle of hedges and trees silhouetted against the backdrop of sheets of pouring rain. The sound had come from the direction of the Carrington estate, not a stone's throw away, where the wealthy widow, Mrs. Margaret Carrington, had recently hosted a gathering of peculiar guests. A sense of foreboding washed over Miss Marple. It had not been long since the hushed murmurs of the village had hinted at secrets hidden within that ornate manor. Whatever had transpired could not be dismissed lightly. With cautious determination, she donned her raincoat and grabbed her umbrella, venturing out into the damp air, the rain drenching her frail form as she crossed the threshold of her cottage. The path to the Carrington estate felt longer in the darkness, the eerie ambience thickening with every step. The storm raged overhead, lightning flickering. She reached the manor's entrance, her heart pounding louder than the thunder rumbling in the distance. Stepping inside, Miss Marple found herself in a dimly lit foyer, the air heavy with tension. A figure stood in the hallway, silhouetted against the flickering light of the chandelier. It was Henry Carrington, Mrs. Carrington's reclusive son, his expression pallid and distraught. "Miss Marple, thank heavens you arrived." "It's dreadful." His voice wavered, betraying the intensity of his emotions. "What has happened, Mr. Carrington?" she asked, striding closer as the scent of rain and worry enveloped them both. "It's Mother. She's missing." A chill gripped Miss Marple's heart, yet her mind immediately began to work through the layers of the unfolding mystery. "Missing, you say? But was it not just this very morning that she entertained the entire village to tea?" "Indeed," Henry replied, glancing over his shoulder as if the shadows had ears. "But when I entered her sitting room a moment ago, she was gone, and the door to her garden was wide open, the wind howling through it as if calling her name. I heard noises from the foliage, rather like a scuffle, then silence." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The elegant garden bordering the estate bore an air of enchantment by day, but beneath cloak of night it transformed into a realm teeming with secrets. Could it be that she simply wandered outside? Henry's brow furrowed. Mother is frail, though a spirited woman. She wouldn't venture out into such dreadful weather unless something drove her. "Please, you must help me find her." With an urgent nod, Miss Marple retrieved her umbrella and strode toward the garden's door, wading into the roiling shadows. The rain dripped heavily from the foliage, and the thunder grumbled ominously above. In the dim haze, she could make out the statues and stone paths that crisscrossed the grounds, remnants of a beautiful design now swallowed by the storm. "Over here!" Henry's voice called out from the vicinity of a nearby shrub. Miss Marple hurried to join him, her heart sinking as she spotted an item buried in the undergrowth. Kneeling to retrieve it, Her fingers closed around an elegant silver locket, its chain twisted in the damp earth. "Is this—" Henry began, his voice taut. "Yes," she affirmed, examining it closely. "This is your mother's. The initials MC are engraved on the back." She turned the locket to face him, and his eyes widened in horror. What was she doing here, alone? He whispered, fear rising. "Perhaps it's time to consider the guests she hosted at tea, Henry. Were there any particular disagreements?" Just as he began to shake his head, a violent flicker of light illuminated the garden, revealing a dark figure slipping away into the bushy undergrowth. Miss Marple straightened, her breath hitching in her throat. "Did you see that?" Tension thrummed in the air as Henry squinted into the gloom. "I couldn't make out who it was." They both stepped cautiously into the shadows seeming to swirl with every passing whisper of wind. Miss Marple wanted to call out, to seek the figure who had vanished a mere few moments before. "We must investigate." Just then, the soft sound of footsteps echoed behind them. They whirled around, and there stood Mrs. Althea Pembroke, one of the tea guests, her face faintly illuminated by a flash of distant lightning. The expression on her usually composed face was one of wide-eyed panic. "Henry, Miss Marple," she gasped, her clothes speckled with rain. "I heard a commotion. Have you found Mrs. Carrington?" Before they could respond, a distant cry echoed once more, reverberating against the manor's walls, a chilling wail that sliced through the damp air like the lightning overhead, leaving the three standing in dread-stricken silence. "Quick, to the greenhouse," Miss Marple whispered, determination taking hold of her. As they raced toward the glass structure, shadows flickered in the corner of her vision, the flicker of secrets lingering just out of reach. She had only begun to feel the edges of the mystery unfurling before her. What nefarious agenda was at play? As they sloshed through the rain, the echoes of uncertainty loomed large, the search for Margaret Carrington deepening into a web of deceit. Miss Marple could sense it. There was more than helplessness in the storm. Something nefarious lurked just beyond sight. In the heart of the Eotsi shadows, the garden held more than just tangled roots and creeping vines. Secrets begged to be uncovered, and she was perilously close to revealing the truth. The next move would be decisive, and as she reached for the door of the greenhouse, a gust of wind slammed it open, darkness spilling forth like a tide. What awaited them inside was anyone's guess, but Miss Marple was undeterred. With hesitant resolve, she stepped inside, heart racing, ready to confront whatever shadows lay ahead. Chapter 7. The Hidden Room. The storm that had brewed all evening finally unleashed its fury with a deafening crack of thunder that rattled the window panes of the old Grimsdyke Manor. Rain hammered down like 1,000 drummers, drenching the stone facade and creating a gloomy curtain that separated the secrets within from the world outside. Desperate strokes of lightning illuminated the twisting branches of the yew trees surrounding the estate, making the night feel alive with ominous intent. Miss Marple sat in the drawing room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows upon her thoughtful face. She cradled her teacup, its porcelain cool against her palm, while her keen gaze flitted restlessly over the gathering of the few guests she had come to know during this troubled visit to the manor. Each was wrapped tightly in their own coils of anxiety, their conversations hushed as if they were unwilling to share their secrets even with her, the perennial amateur detective. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the hall. Miss Marple set down her cup, instinctively alert. The shadows danced as the butler, Mr. Hargrove, opened the heavy oak door. In stepped Clara Post, the frail yet spirited daughter of the late Sir Reginald Post, who had met with an untimely demise less than a week ago. Her face, usually lively, was now drawn and pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Miss Marple," Clara gasped, clutching her cardigan close, "you must come quickly. I believe I've found something that belonged to my father." "What is it, my dear?" Miss Marple rose immediately, her heart quickening. She shot a glance at the others in the room. Lord Hargrove, a distant cousin with a weary demeanour, and Mrs. Spindle, Sir Reginald's elderly housekeeper, whose wrinkled hands trembled at her side. They had all been unusually interested in the late baronet's affairs since his murder, and Miss Marple's instincts drew taut with the scent of potential deception. "Follow me," Clara urged, leading them through the dimly lit corridors of the manor. The walls, draped in dark, rich wallpaper, seemed to absorb their footsteps, a whispering audience to their hurried descent. They passed a gallery of family portraits, each gaze more reproachful than the last as they confronted the living with their past. Clara led them to a door at the end of the corridor that Miss Marple had seen before. The door to the well-guarded library, always locked and never accessed since Sir Reginald's death. Clara hesitated for a moment, the weight of her heritage bearing down. "I was cleaning out the drawers in his study and found a key with his initials engraved. I think it opens this door." With bated breath, Miss Marple witnessed Clara insert the key into the ornate lock, the metal groaning as if protesting against long years of neglect. The door swung wide to reveal an astonishing sight. The library had been untouched by the chaos that had ensued since the murder. Dust motes swirled in the air like lost memories, and the shelves sagged under the weight of books and secrets. "Look," Clara gasped, pointing towards a darkened corner cloaked in more dust than the rest. There, obscured behind a towering bookcase, was a small door, hardly noticeable in the gloom. It stood ajar, revealing a rickety staircase spiraling downward. Could it lead to— Miss Marple's voice trailed off, realizing the implications, an uncharted territory hidden within a space, already enigmatic. "Yes, but it must have been sealed away for years," Clara stammered. Before Miss Marple could offer her thoughts, Lord Hargrove's voice broke the tension, dripping with anxiety. "We shouldn't tread upon the past. It's best left undisturbed." "Not if it holds the key to solving your cousin's murder," Miss Marple said gently, but there was steel in her voice. The way Lord Hargrove's eyes flickered away told her more than she needed to know. He feared what they might find. With a deliberate intention, Clara took a step forward. "It can't be worse than the grief we're already enduring." She led the way down the narrow staircase, the wood creaking ominously beneath their feet. Miss Marple, firmly grasping her handbag, followed close behind, acutely aware of every movement and sound. The air grew cooler and heavier as they descended, each creak of the stairs seeming to echo warnings from the spirits of the house. At the bottom, they stepped into a cramped cell, poorly lit by the scant light filtering through a barred window. The walls were lined with dusty chests and scattered papers, some yellowed with age. Clara reached for one of the chests and flipped open the lid. The contents spilled forth, old letters, a locket, and there, amongst the tatters, a blood-stained handkerchief. The sight caused Miss Marple's mind to race with implications while Clara recoiled, hands trembling. "Father never mentioned these." Clara's voice was shaky, but there was an underlying curiosity. The blood-stained fabric screamed of hidden truths, beckoning her to confront whatever dark history lay entangled with her father's name. Miss Marple reached for the handkerchief, noticing the distinct monogram, an arch ornately stitched upon it. "Now, who might this belong to?" she murmured, her thoughts racing. A chilling realization hit her. Only one member of the household had a secret that tied to that initial. Before she could articulate her thoughts, a loud bang resonated from above, causing them to jump. There were raised voices, muffled sounds of struggle, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps stomping through the hall. "Stay here," Miss Marple commanded, but the clamor above was drowning her decision. She darted to the staircase, her heart racing, aware that what awaited them was far darker than they imagined. As she reached the top, she turned just in time to see a shadow slipping away into the night, a figure racing through the rain-soaked garden, unbridled and free, leaving them to grapple with the chilling knowledge that the true mystery was only deepening. What harbored the hidden room? Who was the shadow that fled into the storm? A torrent of questions surged through Miss Marple's mind as she resolved to discover the truth looming on the horizon. The night was far from over. Chapter 8. A Heartfelt Confession. The rain was falling in sheets, a relentless curtain that obscured the quiet village of St. Mary Mead. The night was darker than usual, with storm clouds swirling ominously above, like a cloak draping over the earth. Through the tempest, a lone figure moved purposefully towards the ancient, creaking manor of the Hawthorne family, shrouded in the ivy that clung desperately to its weathered stones. Inside, suspicion hung thick in the air, far heavier than the rain outside. Miss Marple had been invited there under the pretense of a social gathering, but she could feel the undercurrent of tension that rippled through the household. She had arrived just as thunder rumbled overhead, a warning of the chaos that was surely brewing. Mrs. Hawthorne's drawing room had an oppressive atmosphere. It was lavishly adorned with velvet drapes that were now slightly damp from the incessant weather, and portraits of stern ancestors gazed down imperiously as if judging the state of their descendants. The arched windows rattled during each thunderclap, and the air smelled of wet earth and secrets. "Miss Marple, how delightful to see you," said Caroline Hawthorne, her voice shaken but cheerful as she entered the room. Though her smile barely reached her eyes, Miss Marple detected an underlying strain, as if the woman were wearing her own skin too tightly. At her side was her cousin Richard, known for his charm, yet shadowed by a brooding disposition. He stood with arms crossed, brimming with barely contained agitation. "I would have preferred a clearer sky," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile, her keen eyes assessing the pair. "What dismal weather we've been burdened with. I imagine it feels even more oppressive when the heart is heavy." "True," Caroline murmured, glancing nervously at Richard, who shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutinizing gaze of their guest. "But today we have a surprise. My brother Arthur has decided to join us for tea." She forced genuine enthusiasm into her voice, yet Miss Marple noted the way her hand trembled slightly around her teacup. "Splendid," Miss Marple said evenly. "News of Arthur is always a pleasure." She made the effort to focus on their trivial discussions, noting how Richard rarely looked up and how his eyes smoldered with unarticulated resentment. Meanwhile, Caroline's nervous chatter seemed to oscillate between forced gaiety and palpable anxiety. Then came a firm knock on the door, reverberating even over the rain's rhythm. Richard's expression morphed into something resembling dread. and deep down, Miss Marple felt a chill. Slowly, Mrs. Hawthorne opened the door to reveal Arthur Hawthorne, bedraggled and waterlogged, his face a mask of worry. "Arthur, whatever has kept you?" Caroline exclaimed, rushing to embrace her brother. "Caroline, He hesitated, glancing over at Miss Marple, who observed the assemblage with her astute gaze. "I need to speak with all of you, urgently." The vibe shifted as Arthur stepped through the threshold, dripping water onto the polished floor. Miss Marple's curiosity piqued. The tension could be cut with a knife. Silence fell over the group, the storm outside only adding to the charged atmosphere. "Is it about the business venture?" Richard prompted, annoyance lacing his tone as he held firm to his right to intrude. Arthur glanced at Richard, then took a deep breath, resolve washing over his features. "No, it's about Agnes. She's gone, missing." Caroline gasped, and Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Agnes was Arthur's longtime confidant, a woman who held the family's secrets in her delicate hands. "For how long?" Caroline's voice trembled. "Since this morning. I last saw her before she left the market. I've searched the village, asked everyone. No one has seen her since." Miss Marple felt gravity settle in the room, as if all the air had been siphoned out. "And tell me, was there anything unusual that Agnes mentioned prior to her disappearance? Did she seem anxious, perhaps?" Her voice was calm but steely, honing in on the details. Arthur's expression darkened. "She did speak of feeling unwell, but it was nothing alarming, or so I thought. There was a sense of dread about her. Something seemed to weigh heavily on her mind." Richard scoffed. "You're making a fuss over nothing, Arthur. She'll turn up. She always does." "Nonsense!" Caroline cried out, her eyes wide with fear. "We must do something. Miss Marple, do you think—" Before she could continue, a loud crash erupted from the far end of the manor, sending shivers through all present. The noise was both alarming and foreboding, echoing through the ancient halls like a ghostly whisper. Miss Marple's heart raced as she exchanged glances with the others. "Stay here," Arthur commanded, a fierce determination in his voice overshadowed by concern. "I'll investigate." As Arthur left, Miss Marple focused her thoughts, sensing the tether of events tightening around the hapless Agnes. The sound had come from the library, a room filled with tomes that held the arcane knowledge of the Hawthorne family, each shelf an intricate web of tales, some glowing with warmth, others steeped in shadows. Suddenly, Caroline's ringing phone cut through the remaining tension. "This is very odd," Caroline muttered. "It's in my pocket." Her voice trembled as she pulled it out, frowning at the silence before clearing her throat and answering. "Hello?" "Yes." "Oh." A chilling pause ensued, during which Miss Marple's eyes darted to Richard. His jaw tightened, the muscles flexing in a way that suggested layers of concealed angst. "Agnes?" Caroline's voice cracked as the realization settled in. "Where are you?" The reply was muffled. It could have been several seconds, but in a flash, her face paled, and she dropped the receiver, gasping. "What was that? What did she say?" Miss Marple probed, stepping forward. Richard moved closer as well, tension sparking between the trio. She said she knows something dangerous," Caroline stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "And that she's afraid." It was then that Miss Marple's keen mind whirred into action. The pieces were coming together, though the picture remained murky. Could it be that Agnes's unease correlated with the enigmatic envelope she'd seen earlier, tucked into Richard's coat. And what were the bounds of loyalty, love, and deceit within this family? In one swift moment, lightning illuminated the room, casting shadows that danced ominously along the walls. A sudden realization gripped Miss Marple. The threat wasn't merely from the outside, it lay within the very heart of the Hawthorne household. "I believe," Miss Marple said slowly, her voice low yet piercing, "the danger is far closer than we imagined." And with that statement, the tension reached a fever pitch, leaving them all teetering on the brink of revelation. The rain continued to pour, but that was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside the manor. The question lingered. What horrors awaited them next? Chapter 9. The trap is set. The night was thick with rain, the kind that lingered long after the sun had vanished behind the mountains. Miss Marple stood at the window of her quaint cottage, watching the raindrops race down the glass. Each droplet seemed like a messenger, bringing tidings from the world outside. Tonight, however, something weighed heavily on her mind, something lurking in the shadows, veiled by the storm. The latest news of Mr. Ainsley's unfortunate demise had sent a ripple of unease through the quiet village of St. Mary Mead. With each detail unfurling in hushed whispers, Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to the peculiarities of those who remained, the tangled web of secrets hidden beneath their charming exteriors. She had always believed that in a quiet village where everyone knew each other's business, the truth could only be obscured for so long. A sharp knock at her door startled her from her reverie. The sound echoed through the stillness, ricocheting off the walls like a harbinger of dread. She opened the door to reveal Constable Larkin, his face drawn and wet with the incessant rain. "Miss Marple, I must ask for your assistance," he said, stepping inside and shaking off droplets like a dog emerging from a swim. "It's about the investigation." Intrigued, she gestured for him to sit by the fire, the warmth eager to dispel the chill of the storm. As he settled into an armchair, Larkin leaned forward, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "We've reason to believe there may be another attempt at foul play. I suspect that whoever took Mr. Ainsley's life may strike again." "Who is the intended victim this time?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes narrowing with the fascination of the unfolding mystery. "Mrs. Mortimer. She's been acting strangely since Ainsley's death, speaking of secrets and hidden treasures," he replied, glancing towards the window as if the rain itself might offer an answer. "Earlier today, she claimed she knew about a letter that could expose someone in the village. It's gone missing." Miss Marple tapped her fingers pensively on her knee. "Then we must put her under watch. If she possesses the means to invoke such threats, it begs the question, what is she hiding?" As Larkin spoke, she thought back to her last encounter with Mrs. Mortimer, her pronounced nervousness, the twitch of her hands constantly smoothing her dress as if she were trying to erase the imprints of her guilt. "The trap is set," she muttered mostly to herself, the words tasting strange, yet promising. "You think?" Larkin inquired, his brow furrowing with concern. "I think, Constable, that we have unwittingly cast ourselves into the role of bait. Perhaps her knowledge has brought danger not just to Mrs. Mortimer, but to all of us." Her voice was steady, edged with the anticipation of a well-laid plan. "Shall we pay her a visit?" Outside, the rain intensified, pouring like a torrent as they made their way to Cedar House, Mrs. Mortimer's residence. The cracked path, illuminated only by the flickering lanterns on the walls, seemed almost alive, as if murmuring secrets of its own. Twisted branches clawed against the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced in the night. As they approached the front door, Miss Marple noticed something fluttering on the ground, a torn piece of parchment, soaked yet still legible. Picking it up, she read the words scrawled across the page, names scribbled haphazardly, and the name Ainsley prominently encircled. "Interesting," she murmured, folding the paper and tucking it into her coat pocket. They knocked, and after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Mrs. Mortimer stood before them, her pale face glowing in the dim light of her hallway. "Constable, Miss Marple, how lovely of you to come," she said, her voice pitched too high. "May we come in, Mrs. Mortimer?" Miss Marple asked, wary of the mounting tension in the air. Of course," she said, stepping back, allowing them to enter. The faint scent of lavender clung to the rich wood, mingling with the cold atmosphere as though the house itself were unsure of whom to trust. They exchanged pleasantries, but Miss Marple watched closely, noticing the way Mrs. Mortimer fidgeted, her fingers playing with a string of pearls around her neck like a child's attempt to soothe frayed nerves. "You mentioned losing a letter earlier. Might you tell us which letter it was?" "Oh, merely some family correspondence," she stammered, eyes darting to the window as if seeking refuge from the storm outside. "We've all been rather confused since Mr. Ainsley passed. Do you believe anyone in town would wish for that correspondence to remain hidden?" Miss Marple continued delicately, observing the small tremors in her hands. "No, I simply think it might cause more trouble than it's worth," she replied, but the cracks in her bravado were evident to Miss Marple, and the web was beginning to unravel around her. Just then, a loud crack of thunder rumbled outside, startling them. In that moment, a shadow flickered at the window. Miss Marple exchanged a startled glance with Larkin, her heart racing. "Mrs. Mortimer, is there someone outside?" she asked, a note of urgency in her voice. She moved to the window, peering through the rain-soaked glass, and what met her eyes sent a chill spiraling down her spine. A figure clad in dark clothing darted away from the manor, just as a flash of lightning illuminated the night for an instant, leaving behind more questions than answers. "Who was that?" Larkin demanded, as Miss Marple turned back to Mrs. Mortimer, who was now pale as the winter moon. I don't know," she gasped, recoiling slightly, but Miss Marple's gaze was sharp, catching the subtle flicker of her pupils. Before she could pursue the matter further, a muffled sob emanated from the back of the house, sending shadows dancing more violently against the walls. The sound swirled like a noxious cloud, luring them deeper into the mystery. The ramifications of this encounter weighed heavily on Miss Marple as they exited Cedar House, her thoughts rushing like the rain. The torn piece of parchment burned in her pocket, aching to reveal more secrets. The trap had indeed been set, and now it was only a matter of time before the pieces fell into place, revealing the true essence of the melodrama. As she returned home, the storm raged outside, but it was nothing compared to the tempest that brewed within her mind. For she now understood that within this village cloaked in charm, shadows lingered where darkness thrived, and everyone was but a pawn on a chessboard, each concealing motives that burned deeper than the night's storm. What had started as mere gossip had entwined itself into a convoluted mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it, down to the very last thread. But who would fall prey to the trap she was inadvertently encouraging? And what secrets would surface before the dawn broke? Thus the night thickened with unyielding tension, and as she settled into bed, the rain drummed a sinister tune. marking the beginning of the end. Chapter 10. The key to the manor rain lashed against the windows of St. Mary Mead, drumming an incessant rhythm that echoed through the dimly lit interior of the community library. By the flickering light of a lone gas lamp, Miss Marple scribbled notes from her latest investigation. The air was thick with the mingled scents of old wood and damp pages, an atmosphere that lent a weight to her thoughts. A dark shadow loomed over her mind, an unanswered question, a mystery that grew thornier as she drew closer to its heart. The clock struck 10, and the echoing chimes filled the room. Just as the last toll faded, a sudden, furious knocking erupted at the library door, jangling her nerves. Miss Marple set her pen down. Curiosity piqued. She shuffled to the door, her soft slippers barely making a sound on the worn floorboards, and pulled it open. Standing drenched from the downpour was Constable Craggs, his coat plastered to his form, and his expression one of uncharacteristic urgency. "Miss Marple, there's been another incident at Evershot Manor," he gasped, hair slicked back and face pallid from the evening chill. "You must come with me. It's George. He's dead." Panic surged through Miss Marple, gripping her heart with icy fingers. She had suspected foul play surrounding the reclusive manager of the estate, whose death during yesterday's storm had stirred the village into a frenzy of suspicion and gossip. As she stepped outside, the rain beat down, washing over her like icy fingers poised to grip her soul. The path to Evershot Manor was treacherous, mired in thick mud and saturated with the remnants of the storm. Constable Craggs's lantern flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced along the wet earth as they traversed the darkened path. When they arrived, the manor loomed before them, an imposing, creaky structure enveloped in mystery. Inside, the manor felt claustrophobic, the air heavy with the musty scent of history and secrets. As they ascended the grand staircase, Miss Marple noted the intricately woven carpet and the family portraits that glared down at her, each one a reminder of the history that enveloped this place. In the drawing room, they found George Allerton sprawled lifeless on the floor. A silver key gleamed in the dim light, caught in the wet folds of his shirt. "Killed at close range, no doubt," said Inspector Collins, who arrived moments later, his eyebrows knitted tightly together. He crouched beside the body, eyes narrowing. But a key? What could it mean? Miss Marple moved closer, feeling the instinctive pull of her curiosity. "May I take a look, Inspector?" she asked gently. "Just be careful," he cautioned, stepping aside. Craggs watched apprehensively as she picked up the key. Its ornate design spoke of age. It was too large for a simple lock, perhaps made for a more elaborate mechanism. She flipped it over, the cold metal glinting under the gaslight. "A key to somewhere important," she murmured, noticing engravings that appeared almost like initials. "Find anything?" Collins queried, eyebrows arched expectantly. She gazed into the fireplace, then around the drawing room, the memories lingering like shadows. "Have there been any deaths in this family that might connect to the key?" Collins furrowed his brow, contemplating. "Mary Cresswell, his great-aunt, died in this very room 5 years ago. Heart attack. They say she had quite the inheritance from her late husband." "Ah, money usually exhumes more than one layer of dirt," she replied, a spark lighting in her eyes as she formed a connection that felt tangible. "And what of Mary's will, Inspector? Was her estate in disarray? Conflicts among heirs?" "There were whispers, but nothing ever solidified," he confessed, eyes darting to the key in her hand. "But George was set to inherit, and some family members were not happy. Quite so. And was there any mention of a hidden safe? She prodded, aware of the depths of family feuds, often lurking in the shadows. Inspector Collins straightened, musing. Not that was known to me, but I'll fetch the police records. There might be something we overlooked. Miss Marple nodded, maintaining her focus on the key. Craggs, may I borrow your lantern? I'd like to look around. Willingly, he passed it to her, his face betraying curiosity regarding her intentions. She turned and wandered to the panelled walls, testing the seams with delicate fingers and seeking any movement. In a discreet corner, her instincts flared as she noticed a slight indent in the wood. Tapping gently, she discerned a hollow sound beneath her touch. "Inspector," she exclaimed, excitement bubbling within her. "I believe this wall holds more than just air." As the men rushed to her side, she continued her exploration, heart racing as she searched for the mechanism. After moments of careful prodding, a small panel clicked open, revealing a concealed compartment nestled within the wall. Within it lay an old leather-bound journal, pages yellowed with age. "I had a feeling George was holding on to something," she murmured, sliding the journal from its hiding place, wiping the dust off, then flipping it open. As she scanned the contents, a flush of recognition crossed her face. The handwriting matched that of the very letters that had come into her possession, letters that had belonged to the late Mary Cresswell. "Quite the treasure, isn't it?" Collins remarked, peering over her shoulder as she read, her heart pounding in anticipation of the secrets it contained. Yet before she could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the drawing room behind them. Miss Marple leapt back, journal in hand, the air thickening with tension. The three shared a quick glance of apprehension before racing back to the source of the noise, where they found the large window wide open, the rain roaring through, and a hastily discarded cloak trailing outside. "What in the world?" Craggs began, but his words faltered as they all exchanged knowing looks. Someone had entered the room moments before them, compelling them to return to the manor brimming with secrets, and now they were gone. "Find out who belongs to that cloak," Collins commanded, revitalized by urgency, "and don't stop until you learn what else lies between these walls." Miss Marple clutched the journal tightly, feeling the weight of it in her hands, her mind churning with the possibilities. The keys to the manor were no longer just a fabric of the past. They held the whispers of the living. Would she unlock a truth that might change the course of this already tangled story? As they dashed into the storm, the rain thundering behind them, she felt the palpable tension hovering in the air, a telling portent of the truths yearning to be uncovered. Chapter 11. The Truth Beneath the Surface. The rain lashed against the gables of the old manor house like 1,000 whispers, each drop echoing the pulse of a village full of secrets. Miss Marple stood at the window, her gaze intense, eyes narrowed against the swirling mist. Outside, the waning moon tried desperately to pierce through the clouds, casting a ghostly light upon the unkempt garden where shadows danced between the tangled foliage. Just moments before, a piercing scream had shattered the stillness of the night, sending a chill through her pragmatic bones. "Miss Marple!" A voice trembled behind her. It was Mrs. Havisham, the housekeeper, her cheeks pale as she clutched her apron. "There's been a terrible incident in the library." "Lead the way, Mrs. Havisham," Miss Marple responded, her heart racing, but her composure unshaken. As they traversed the dimly lit hallways, a mixture of oppressive silence and the incessant patter of rain enveloped them. They entered the library, and the scene before her twisted Miss Marple's stomach. Lord Bellington lay slumped over his desk, a glass of spilled sherry pooling beneath him, its crimson hue reminiscent of a murder scene in one of her novels. "Oh dear," she murmured, crouching beside the fallen nobleman. A superficial glance revealed nothing amiss. No wounds, no poison, yet his expression was one of horror, eyes wide and unseeing. What was he working on, she asked, her sharp mind already sifting through details. Mrs. Havisham pointed shakily to the papers strewn across the desk. "He was writing a letter, Miss Marple. I thought perhaps—" Her words trailed off, a shadow of guilt on her face. Miss Marple sifted through the crumpled pages, her fingers deftly caressing the handwriting, noting the elegant but erratic strokes. It occurred to her that letter writing, especially such a desperate missive, hinted at an emotional storm. Suddenly, she paused at a name, her heart quickening. Victoria Allingham. Why was Lord Bellington penning a letter to his long-dead love? The very act suggested either profound remorse or buried feelings not yet laid to rest. "What do you know about Victoria, Mrs. Havisham?" Miss Marple pressed, her gaze not leaving the letter. "Only tales, miss. They say she was the love of his life, but she passed tragically young. Murdered, they say." The housekeeper's voice dropped to a whisper, as if the walls themselves might overhear the gossip. "Murdered?" Miss Marple leaned closer, the thrill of a new connection sparking in her mind. "And you believe that could somehow relate to Lord Bellington's death?" "I wouldn't presume to link them, but the villagers do speak. A curse, they say," Mrs. Havisham continued, worry creasing her brow, "that those who love too fiercely tend to meet cruel fates." With a swift turn, Miss Marple stood and surveyed the room, consciousness alive to every detail. The rain hammering against the windows, the shadows lurking just out of reach. "And what about the other guests?" she asked, a formidable glimmer lighting her eyes. "Their motives?" "Mr. Trevelyan has always held a grudge against Lord Bellington. They were business partners once, you see. Then there's the young Miss Caitlin. The way she spoke about him after dinner left a bad taste in my mouth." "Interesting." With a single touch, Miss Marple gathered the scattered papers and tucked them into her pocket, determined to study the letter more closely later. "Gather the guests. Mrs. Havisham, we need to cast a wider net." "What do you suspect, Miss Marple?" Mrs. Havisham asked, her voice wavering. "People often reveal more than they intend in times of distress." As she spoke, Miss Marple felt a slight tremor ripple beneath her thoughts, the hint of a plan forming. If she represented the calm in this storm, perhaps the truth would rise. Soon enough, the glum assembly of guests was ushered into the drawing-room, their expressions betraying a mixture of concern and unease. Mr. Trevelyan paced restlessly, while Miss Caitlin sat with her arms crossed, eyeing the others warily. With careful precision, Miss Marple orchestrated their thoughts, deftly probing each of their relations with Lord Bellington and with one another. "Mr. Trevelyan, I believe your business dealings with Lord Bellington were less than favorable," she intoned, her voice light but cutting like the crisp autumn air. "Motive, perhaps." "I had every reason to resent him, yes," he said, sharply, face flushing. "But that does not instill a desire for murder. What would such an act prove?" Miss Caitlin interjected, a cool smile on her lips. "Perhaps it was not merely business. Perhaps it was something personal." "Oh, do tell," Miss Marple quipped, her eyes twinkling with interest. "Murder rarely is about business alone, Miss Marple. It is about emotions, jealousy, rage," she said, and beneath her composed facade, Miss Marple sensed a deeper layer of bitterness brewing. "That's quite insightful, Miss Caitlin." Miss Marple tilted her head, studying her with keen intensity. "And what emotions do you harbour towards Lord Bellington?" Seizing the moment, Miss Marple turned from Caitlin, surveying the group. Exhausted by this exchange, fatigue drew across the guests' faces, yet there it was, a sudden, quiet realization glimmering in her own, her instincts sharpening. Just then, a commotion erupted when an unexpected figure burst through the door, breathless and dishevelled. It was the village constable, a wild look in his eyes. "Miss Marple, you need to see this. We've found something in the water." He hesitated, glancing at the assembled guests as if weighing their loyalty. "Something concerning." "What is it?" Miss Marple felt a ripple of anticipation race through her. "Down by the river. It's connected to Lord Bellington's letter, I suspect." The constable's revelation hung thickly in the air, heavy with promise, leaving an unresolved thread that tugged at the edges of her restless mind. "Very curious indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her heart quickening with the thrill of unearthing something more profound. She glanced at the bewildered expressions surrounding her. Caitlin, Trevelyan, Havisham. Each of them bore pieces of this intricate puzzle, and she could feel the truth beginning to surface beneath the alluring but deceptive currents of deceit. "Shall we?" Miss Marple turned to the door, stepping toward the unknown, knowing that every step would bring them closer to the truth. The rain continued to pour outside, a gentle symphony to the chaos yet to unfold. And in that moment, she knew time was no longer a luxury they could afford. Chapter 12. The Confession. No one heard. The rain beat down relentlessly upon the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, each drop echoing a soft reminder of a sinister fate that had recently unfurled within the village. A thick fog hung densely in the air, blurring the outlines of the quaint houses and casting shadows that twisted and writhed eerily. It was the perfect night for secrets to weave themselves into the fabric of the damp atmosphere, and for the unseen to creep into the conscience of the living. Miss Jane Marple peered out from her sitting-room window, watching as Jeanette Tringham, the village's postmistress, hurriedly made her way home, her raincoat flapping like the wings of a distressed bird. The girl had scarcely lifted her eyes from the stone path before her. That was not surprising. Jeanette remained the most nervous of creatures since the whirlwind of tragedy that had recently beset the village. Her hurried gait spoke of bizarre happenings. Miss Marple, her mind as sharp as ever, contemplated the evening ahead with an instinctual sense of dread. It had been little over a fortnight since Lord Robert Dunstan had met his untimely end at the Dunstan Manor, a stately relic that cast long shadows over the village and seemed to contain as many secrets as rooms. Each day that followed had added to the web of intrigue surrounding the case, yet nothing had progressed. Not genuinely, at least. Miss Marple was determined to peel back the layers of deceit like the skins of an onion until she found the truth buried beneath that sickly sweet veneer. With her mind made up, she donned her coat and took her umbrella, stepping out into the storm that urged even the bravest souls to retreat inside. The narrow footpath curving toward the Dunstan estate was slippery, a veritable trick for those inattentive. Miss Marple moved with purpose, her heart warmed by the knowledge that a hidden message still lingered, waiting to be deciphered. If only she could find it. She reached the manor. She stood for a moment beneath the old oak that guarded the entrance. Its gnarled branches whispered in the wind, perhaps trying to offer their own warning. But Miss Marple's thoughts were racing. She had come to realize that secrets often remained latched away within the walls, where not even the wind could carry them. The door creaked open to reveal Lavinia Dunstan, Lord Robert's sister, whose sallow complexion suggested she hadn't slept since her brother's death. The flicker of a candlelight illuminated deep shadows under her eyes, bringing forth her agitated visage. "Miss Marple," she greeted, her voice a low rasp. "What brings you here in such dreadful weather?" "Good evening, Mrs. Dunstan. I hope I'm not intruding. I felt it required to return. There are matters left to untangle, and I understand your brother had a meeting on the night he died. Might I inquire if anything discussed struck you as unusual?" A shadow passed across Lavinia's face, tightening her features into a mask of discomfort. It didn't escape Miss Marple's keen observation that she glanced aside, a telltale sign of evasion. "It was merely a business discussion," she uttered, with hesitation etched in her voice. "But you insisted on attending," Miss Marple prodded gently. "In a household so distraught, surely you must have your reasons." "I wanted to hear it for myself. But Miss Marple, Robert didn't confide the entirety of the meeting to me," Lavinia replied, rubbing her forehead. "I fear it was nothing more than foolish intrigues about investments and such." Murmuring in acknowledgement, Miss Marple's gaze flicked to the fireplace, where the ruins of burnt wood lingered. "You know," she began, gauging her intentions, "words can evoke shadows longer than those one finds in myths." Lavinia's brow furrowed, confused. "What do you mean?" "There is often a truth hidden behind what is not said," she continued. "For instance, was anyone present uninvited, perhaps?" Silence hushed the room, thickening the tension. "No, no one else came, Miss Marple." But the hesitation told Miss Marple much more than the words dared reveal. As the murmur of rain pattered against the window, Miss Marple's attention drifted to the mantel where a photograph was displayed, a recent one of Lord Robert, self-absorbing yet exuding the naivete of one unaware of a looming catastrophe. It was then her eyes spotted something unusual, the edge of a letter partially sticking out from under Lavinia's letters. "May I see that?" she asked, without waiting for Lavinia's consent. The rustling paper between her fingers sent a shiver down her spine. The words were bold, as if written in haste, yet strangely jagged. Atop it was the unmistakable scrawl of Lord Robert, but it also bore the ink splash of an inkpot, a sign of hasty writing indeed. "An acquaintance, I presume?" Miss Marple asked, still not tearing her eyes from the letter. "Or is it the signature of a friend?" Lavinia made a frantic move to dismiss Miss Marple's assumption, but the detective had already read a crucial line, a fragment that darted straight into Miss Marple's mind. "In the event of my death, it is critical that you understand the implications." "Lavinia," she managed to say, her voice a mere whisper against the growing storm. "This may suggest more than mere business discussions, I am afraid." Before Lavinia could respond, a loud crack of thunder rattled the window panes, followed by a